I didn't come to Kutná Hora for ghosts. I came for a story, the kind that rides in on cold air and leaves ink on your fingers. Sedlec sits northeast of the old silver town. A small knot of streets, a railway stop, and a cemetery hill where a Roman Catholic chapel burrows under stone like a heartbeat. The map calls it the Sedlec Ossuary. The locals call it Kostnice. On a November morning that smelled like wet iron and leaf rot, I shouldered my bag, crossed the quiet road of Zameka, and stood at the gate beneath the cemetery church of All Saints. A crow hopped once along the wall, cocked its head, and let me pass like a bored doorman. Before I ever went below, the place told its story in the wind. In 1278, a Cistercian abbot returned from Jerusalem with a few grains of earth gathered from Golgotha and scattered them over this hill. Soil is only soil until someone names it holy. Once he did, people came from across Bohemia and beyond, wanting their bones to sleep in sacred ground. Then came plague and war and time. Graves filled, graves overfilled. To make room, monks lifted old burials and stacked bones in neat economical piles, the most honest thrift you'll ever see. Centuries later, a craftsman named František Rint arranged those bones into order and ornament. Pyramids, chalices, garlands, a chandelier made, people say, of every bone in the human body. If the origin sounds prosaic, that's because necessity often does. The strange part is not that the bones were moved. It's that they were so carefully asked to mean something again. That prosaic origin should have made the place less frightening. It didn't. Geography does its own haunting. Kutná Hora lies a short train ride east of Prague. Sedlec is its quieter lip. Cypress trees line the cemetery wall like sentries fading into low sky. The hill lifts slightly, as if the earth had inhaled and never quite exhaled. Beneath it, the chapel holds a room of bones, where every edge is a remnant of someone's unrepeatable weather. People say 40,000, some say more. Numbers round off what they cannot carry. The hill knows the weight exactly. "Please be respectful," the ticket woman said at the door. She stamped my stub with a neat thud. "We close at 6. The stone steps tightened, turned, and opened into cold. The smell was mineral, a clean dust like old paper and extinguished candles. I entered quietly, as if into a library where every book stared back. Photographs don't prepare you. The chandelier is not merely a chandelier, but a thesis of anatomy. It hangs from the vault like a white storm paused mid-fall. Skulls are stacked in columns at the corners. Garlands of pelvis and femur loop the arches in patient repetition. In one bay, the Schwarzenberg coat of arms grins in bone, complete with a little raven plucking an eye from a Turkish head, an old heraldic joke made unbearable by its medium. In the corner, pyramids of skulls and long bones rise in four corners like pale ziggurats, the kind of architecture that admits it is made of time. There were other visitors. A whisper in Spanish, a wool cap, a guide's murmured facts, a child touching glass until his mother drew his hand back and kissed his hair. Even with bodies moving, the quiet was a thing you could lean against. I walked the room's edge with my hands folded, as if some old nun had told me to behave. That's when I felt it. Not a presence exactly, but a pressure. A subtle widening of the space behind my ears, as though the air had leaned forward to listen to me listening to it. I steadied myself by counting, 20 skulls in one stack, 30 on the next. It helped until it didn't. The chandelier drew my gaze the way a fire does. I stepped beneath it and looked up. Near the southern edge of the outer ring, I saw a skull whose left orbit had a spidered crack. I don't know why that detail caught me. In a room full of details, our minds pick one like a coin from a fountain. The crack made the skull look surprised, or tired, or newly awake. I lowered my notebook, ashamed of the ugly appetite that had brought me here. When the attendants called, closing in, careful English, tourists began to climb the stairs. I lingered. I have a bad habit of staying until the end in places with too much story. 5 minutes, the woman said to me at the landing. No photographs. Be respectful. The last footfalls faded. The hush recalibrated. It felt like a lung finishing its exhale. I stood by one of the bone pyramids, close enough to see the little seams where skull meets skull. You can know a fact 100 times and still be stunned by it on the 101st. These were people, teeth ground down by bread grit. Sutures like lightning frozen in bone, a bullet-smooth notch here, a healed fracture there. I thought of names that no one had said in centuries and felt the rudeness of not knowing any of them. Then a whisper brushed the back of my neck. It was not language, not at first, more a cool draft shaped like a word. I told myself it was the vent. I told myself a lot of clever things. The whisper returned, lightly this time. A syllable long enough to be heard, but too short to be passed. I turned slowly. No one stood there, only the chandelier. Its white storm stalled above me. "Who's there?" I asked, and immediately hated the movie I had become. If the ossuary had an answer, it chose to deliver it by rearranging the temperature. The chill gathered at my left shoulder and stayed there like a hand that never quite touched. I took one half step back and my heel brushed the stone plinth. My chest decided to breathe again. I whispered sorry to no one and everyone at once. Unhelpfully, my phone trembled in my pocket with a useless alert. When I reached the stairs, I looked back at the skull with the cracked left orbit and felt ridiculous for wanting it to be looking at me. It looked at everything. That is what empty sockets do. I climbed out into late light and the sudden noise of ordinary life. Tires on gravel, a dog bark, a murmured joke. I nodded to the attendant and said goodnight like a person leaving a friend's kitchen. I tried to file it all under fatigue and suggestion. I ate too quickly at a small beer hall on the main road, wiped gravy from my notebook with the corner of a placemat, and promised myself an early bed. But I woke at 3:07 to the memory of that cold hand on my shoulder and the unmistakable rhythm of tapping in the walls. 3 slow, spaced knocks, as if someone were counting a prayer. I told myself it was plumbing. I told myself a lot of cowardly things. Then I told the truth. I wanted to go back. Dawn found me at the cemetery gate with coffee cooling in a paper cup. Frost silvered the grass. The cypress were black against a rinsed sky. The main door was still locked, but a small service door stood unlatched, swollen wood holding it shy of closed. I listened for a minute that felt like 3 and stepped inside. No lights yet. My phone torch made a thin path down the steps. The crypt received me like a held breath. If last night the air had merely watched, this morning, it regarded me. I took my place beneath the chandelier because if you are a fool, you might as well stand in the middle of your foolishness. "I'm listening," I said out loud, and my voice sounded clean and disrespectful at once. Something in the left-hand pyramid moved, not enough to topple, just enough to suggest that immobility is its own kind of lie. Bones do not slide on their own. But perhaps dust falls, perhaps wood shrinks, perhaps the cold remembers shapes. A narrow seam opened between 2 tiers, a mouth made of gaps, and the seam breathed out air that had not been touched by a summer in a very long time. Images came, not like a vision, but like someone else's memory surfacing under mine. A cart and a ringing bell, the sting of vinegar. A hill muddied by too many feet. A child learning to swallow grief without moving his mouth. A monk lifting a skull with both hands and setting it gently among other skulls, the way a mother sets a sleeping baby among brothers. A craftsman aligning femurs as carefully as if they were violin bows. The honest ugliness of practicality, the mercy of arrangement, the ache of it all. "Witness," said the seam of dark between bones. Or maybe I gave the word to the air because I needed a verb. There's something humiliating about being asked for a thing you can actually do. It strips you of your excuses. I can witness. I can carry a story. I can leave it intact. My hands were shaking. I set the phone down, clicked the light lower, and waited. It wasn't that I started hearing voices. It was that the room began telling me what it contained, and my own quiet finally made a shape it could pour into. The skull with the cracked orbit belonged once to someone who had fallen from a horse and lived, badly but long enough to tell the story in scars. Another skull carried a faint groove from a childhood fever and a mother's wet cloth. A third had perfect teeth and a tiny chip in a front incisor, exactly where a flute might rest. None of these things would survive a courtroom. All of them were true enough to stand in. The cold on my shoulder tightened until it found a steadiness that felt grotesquely like comfort. A presence, muted by its own number, decided, for a minute, not to be a crowd. It stepped forward in the only way it could, by arranging my attention. I looked where it asked me to look. I wrote what it asked me to write. I kept my sentences short, because confession demands clarity. Keys clinked on the stairs. The attendant's footfalls were careful as she turned on the lights one by one, warming the crypt by degrees into day. She stopped when she saw me, alarm ghosting over professionalism. "I came early," I said. "I'm sorry." She glanced at the chandelier and then at my notebook. "You had family here?" she asked softly. "In the human sense," I said before I could decide to be clever. She nodded, as if that were the only correct answer, and let me be. Tourists trickled in after 9. Their presence diluted the concentration of the room, which is a kindness to the living. Voices rose in respectful whispers. A priest passed through and bowed, the one gesture that can hold both apology and gratitude without leaking either. I stood at the periphery and let the ossuary be what it was for them. Astonishing, macabre, beautiful. A story to carry home on a phone. When the crowd thinned, I took one more round. The coat of arms looked less like a boast and more like an admission. Power ends in a stack, the same as poverty does. The chandelier had stopped pretending it wasn't a pendulum. It marked time with stillness. Under it, I said thank you without sound, because there is a kind of thanks that doesn't survive the mouth. Outside, a funeral gathered in the cemetery. The ground took another small box the way water takes a stone, by moving around it and ongoing. A woman's gloved hand stayed on the edge of the grave longer than custom allowed. No one pulled her away. The priest was young and uncertain. The old gravedigger nodded to him and made it all holy anyway by doing his job cleanly. On the train back to Prague, fields ran under a low sky like pages turning. My phone showed me the photographs I had taken, blue blur, white towers of bone, a chandelier that never quite fit in the frame. In 2 frames, a faint mist gossamered from a pyramid toward the aisle like breath in winter. I didn't post them. Not everything that exists needs the proof of being seen by strangers. Weeks later, when I finally sat to write, the dust in my notebook fell out between keys like grey snow. Even the grit was a geography. Kutná Hora coming home with me in the smallest unit it could spare. The word that had pressed into my shoulder pressed into the page. Witness. I wrote what I could without polishing it until it shone like a lie. Here is the part that belongs to the beginning of any horror story, and also to its end. The history is not a ghost story, and the ghost story is not a history. Sedlec became what it is because the dead were too many, and the ground was too small, and the faith of the living required economy. No demon designed a chandelier here. A human did, hoping order would soothe the ache. The haunt is not evil. The haunt is the echo of uncountable lives concentrated into a room whose air remembers. Stand there long enough and you will too. If you go, go kindly. Geography matters. This is a hill in Bohemia where cypress make a dark perimeter and the sky sits low when it snows. The chapel is small, the stairs are worn, the world above is ordinary. Keep your hands to yourself. If you must take a photograph, take one. Then put the phone away. Count skulls if you need a rope across the river. Read the plaque and speak the carver's name. He had to learn to look at death until looking became craft, and craft became a mercy. And if the air puts a cold hand on your shoulder, do not jerk away. It is not trying to frighten you. It is reminding you that the border between story and skeleton is thinner than skin. Listen for the tapping, the small patient knocks that timed out 1,000 last breaths, and now time your own heartbeat for a minute. If a seam opens and a memory that is not yours leans into the room, let it pass through you without argument. Do not demand proof. Do not offer interpretation. You are not the verdict. You are the witness. When I left Sedlec, the sky had gone the color of pewter. I crossed the road, heard tires hiss, tasted coal in the air from a stove somewhere. In a bakery window, a woman set out kolaches in a neat line, sweet and real. Life insists. At the station, a boy in a knit hat fed a stray dog half his sandwich, and the dog looked brighter for it. My hands were still cold, but the feeling at my shoulder had moved inside and settled like a folded note. I did not come to Kutná Hora for ghosts. I came for a story. The ghosts, being devout in their practicality, gave me one that fits exactly into a human mouth. It is this. We are bones arranged briefly by breath. When breath goes, something of us still wants a listener. The Sedlec Ossuary is a room built to keep listening. If you stand there and listen long enough, you will hear the chorus say a single word that is also a command and a blessing. I am here and I am listening still for you, witness.